So welcome to part 2 on this CBR barn find restoration, whatever we're calling it. So the biggest issue that I knew about at least was the tank. Because the bike had sat for about 7-8 years unused, the tank ended up filling up with rust, and then I think the last owner tried to get it back on the road, so he cleaned all the rust out, and then had a go at resealing the tank. He used, I think it was Rustbusters Slosh sealant, which I think is probably quite a good one, but I think ultimately all of the tank sealants, they all fail at some point, so they've not got a very good reputation. So I think he got it running again with the sealant, and then it ended up sitting for another year, and then by that time the liner had failed, and the tank was full of rust, and obviously the bike wasn't starting, and I think at that point he didn't have the time or interest to try and get it running again. So that's where I've got it. And to start with, what did I do to start with? So to start with, I ended up taking the fuel pump assembly out, so you can see that there. So the fuel pump wasn't working, it was obviously all seized or whatever, so new fuel pump, new quantum fuel filter, which is slightly cheaper than OEM, replaced that fuel hose, and the regulator is quite common to fail on these, and I noticed that the one that was fitted to the bike was one of the cheap aftermarket ones, so I wasn't really convinced it would last that long or be working right at all, so that's been replaced as well. And then on to what I did to clean out the tank. So I wanted to start quite mild, so I started with citric acid, which did remove some of the rust, but it never touched the liner. It wouldn't do anything to that. So I then tried a couple of different chemicals. I tried like cheap paint stripper, which looked to have the same chemicals in it as the liner remover that the Rustbusters, the manufacturer the liner sell. So that didn't work. Tried acetone, tried MEK. They all softened the liner, but they never made it delaminate off the tank. So none of that worked. So I ended up, what did end up working in the end was caustic soda crystals mixed with water. So there was probably about 2 litres of water in, so the tank wasn't fully submerged, and then I'd gradually added the soda crystals, and you could actually feel the tank heat up from the chemical reaction or whatever. And then basically every couple of hours I just tried to move the tank around so that most of the surfaces of the tank would have been submerged for a couple of hours at least in the caustic soda. The caustic soda was managing to delaminate the liner from the tank, which was good. But even though I was wearing safety glasses, not goggles, so they weren't sealed around the edges, I managed to get a slight splash in my eye, which wasn't ideal, so I did end up in A&E. So if you're going to use caustic soda or sulfuric acid or anything like that, then I would suggest goggles. Once I'd done that was most of it delaminated, so then tried to rinse it all out, and then let it sit for a few days. I knew it would start to rust, and right enough, obviously it did just start rusting again because it was down to bare steel. So I kind of considered basically that the liner removed at that point, and the only thing left was really the rust. So I wanted to do something quite mild that wouldn't damage the tank too much. So I ended up going back to the citric acid again. So it's pretty cheap. I only used this because I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same thing that's in Bilt Hamber Deox, and that gets quite a good write-up for removing rust from tanks, but as usual with like brand names, it's about 5 times the price for something that's as simple as citric acid. So I used that. I think I mixed it about 900 grams into 20 litres of water. It was hot water as well, which helps it dissolve and mix up. And then I put that in a tank, let it was probably submerged for about 2.5 days, but then during that time I was shaking it and trying to sort of agitate it a bit, just to keep the reaction going, and trying to sort of break free any rust that was maybe a bit stubborn. The next priority after doing that was, obviously that did get pretty enough of the rust out to be, I think, pretty satisfied with the overall finish. So then obviously wanted to stop it rusting again, so I actually used this, I used Gasmac mixed with water. I think it was only, I mixed it at 4% strength. So basically that's like a rinse aid that has corrosion inhibitors. So it should have rinsed the citric acid off, but also obviously done some sort of chemical reaction at the surface of the steel to stop it rusting straight away. And then I wasn't totally convinced that would work. I think mainly just because of the fact that it is mostly water. I wasn't sure how effective it would be, so after that I then sprayed loads of ACF 50 in the tank, which is obviously anti-corrosion as well, but something that definitely works, although it's much thicker and quite expensive as well. So I pretty much covered all the inside surfaces of the tank in that, and then I put so much in that there was kind of like a puddle, so I was trying to swish about the puddle just to make sure everything was covered. And then at that point I brought it in the house and tried to dry it out a bit with a hairdryer. And then life got in the way, so it kind of sat for a couple of weeks. But in those couple of weeks, there was no rust at all. No new rust anyway. There's a couple of bits that I never managed to get with the citric acid, but it definitely didn't deteriorate anyway. So I think between the Gasmac and the ACF 50, it definitely done the job. But one issue I did end up getting was, and if I'd known this was going to happen, or that it was as bad as this, I probably would have just bought a used tank on eBay. And I was considering it the whole time, but I was kind of put off by the fact that there was never any yellow ones, and I didn't want to go through the hassle of having to paint it. So I don't know, let me get a torch. So you'll see that the overflow line there actually has a hose clamp and a rubber fuel hose on it. The same going to the other end, because basically the overflow line had rusted right through. To be fair, it was basically the citric acid that had finished it off. You can see the slight rusted right through. So the citric acid, I think, pretty much finished it off. It was all rusted, and I think the rust was kind of actually sealing it, but obviously citric acid removed what was remaining. So that wasn't going to seal, and it was leaking at the bottom of the tank. So I ended up getting like I think it's a Dremel extension, or a mini Dremel extension. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's basically the flexible joint that goes on the end of a Dremel, so you can get into tighter spaces. So I managed to get in and just cut the overflow line out, and then slide over some fuel hose. It was pretty difficult, to be fair, to slide it over, but got the fuel hose slid over the bits that were cut off, and then just clamped it down with a fuel hose. So it's not as if it's under any pressure, so I'm pretty sure it will seal. And the fuel hose is resistant to ethanol and stuff, so it shouldn't deteriorate. It should be a repair that lasts the life of the bike. It never cost too much, but it was a complete pain trying to cut that pipe out and get the hose on. The idea seemed a lot easier in my head until it came to doing it, and obviously the only access point you've got is this hole in the tank, which makes it 10 times more difficult. So you can obviously get some of your hand in there, but then once you've got your hand in, you can't see what you're doing, and you've not got a second hand to like hold things in place while you tighten them up or whatever. So it was quite difficult. and then that's it really. What I'm planning on doing to keep the tank from rusting, is I've got this, which I've never used before, Gasmac. So this is another corrosion inhibitor that you're meant to mix with a fuel. Spray in 2 seconds for every 10 litres of fuel that you add, and it's also meant to work as like a vapour phase inhibitor, so it doesn't just work on the bits of the tank that the fuel's touching. It should also somehow protect the bits where the fuel, like the bits at the top of the tank where there's not fuel or whatever. So I'm hoping to use that just to keep the rust away, and then to start with I'm going to put E10 fuel in, but I might, just to try and reduce the risk of any issues, I might actually start using E5 super unleaded, just to try and limit the amount of ethanol that's in the tank. But this being an older bike, I'm not sure how well it's going to run with super unleaded, but I guess I'll find out. You can kind of see the end result inside there. So the bits where there is rust is at the top. There's obviously some rust in the filler cap, and there's a bit of rust in the centre of the screen there, but for the most part, for the rest of it, but you can see most of it is pretty clean. The streaks that you're seeing is actually the ACF 50 has left a bit of a streak. Other than that, I'd say it's in pretty good condition. Especially when you compare it, I think, to some of the other videos you see on YouTube, where someone's de-rusted a tank, and then they show you the before and after, and in the after photo it's still covered in surface rust. It's just a bit less severe. So I think overall it looks like a good result. And I guess next up will be fitting the tank, or putting the filter assembly back in, and then fitting it on the bike. I'm going to put just a couple of litres of fuel in, swish it about, trying to rinse out any of the ACF 50, and then from there we should be good to go. And in the next video I will probably try and start it up. While I'll be messing around with the tank, because the tank's dragged on for ages, I've serviced it and stuff, so I've changed the oil filter, spark plugs, checked the valve clearances, so I might be going into a bit more of that in the next video, and then hopefully that's when it starts up, if there's no other issues. And I also replaced the fuel cap as well, because the one that was on it was wrecked. So I just got a cheap one on eBay. Only thing is the key doesn't fit, but it looks pretty much the same, but obviously it's not totally rotten like this one, so it'll do. Seeing as it's hopefully going to be a track bike, I don't mind having one key for the tank and one key for the rest of the bike. I'm sure I'll manage. And that's it. So there's a process for you if you're faced with the same issue. Either you can obviously follow part of it if you've just got rust in the tank, but if you have a failed liner and rust, then you're obviously going to have to do something a bit more aggressive using the caustic soda like I done. So yeah,